So far, we have made some really good progress. We have created code which allows our users to sign up and log into our website. Now, many users don't like to be asked their email address and password every time they come back to the website. So what they do, they check the Remember Me box while logging in. So we're going to need to write some code to activate that feature. Okay, so if you go back to the code we have written before, we checked if the Remember Me box is not checked, and then we echoed success straight away. Okay, now if the Remember Me box is checked, we're going to write some code for that. So we have covered the logic of the code earlier, but very briefly what we're going to do, we're going to create a couple of variables that we're going to generate randomly. Okay, and then we're going to store those variables in a cookie on the user's device. Also, we're going to store those variables in the Remember Me table. So when the user comes back, we're going to match whatever variables we retrieve from the cookie on their device with the variables that we find in the database. Okay, and if we have a match, we're going to log that user in. Okay, so let's go ahead and write some code. So first of all, we're going to create these two variables. Okay, so you're going to use a function called OpenSSL, okay, random pseudo bytes as we did before. And this function takes as a parameter the number of bytes that you would like to generate. Okay, so let's go for 10 bytes for the first variable. Also, if you want, you can convert the output of the function, which is in binary. You can convert it to hexadecimal, okay? And the function for that is binary to hexadecimal. Okay, we have used this function before, so you must be familiar with it. And let's generate the second variable in the same way. Okay, for the second variable, you can go for 20 bytes if you like. All right. Okay. Now the next step is to store these variables inside a cookie. Okay, so that's the next step. So to create a cookie, we're gonna use the function setCookie. Okay, so this function is going to take a few parameters. So the first parameter is going to be the name of the cookie. Okay, so let's go for Remember Me. All right, then the second parameter is going to be the value of the cookie. So for now, let's go for a variable that we're going to call cookie value. And we're going to come back to this in a bit. Okay. And then we're going to set the expiration date or expiration date and time for our cookie. Okay. So let's say we would like the cookie to expire 15 days from now. Okay. So you're going to start from the current time. So you're going to go for the Unix timestamp. Okay, so the current time can be referred to using the time function. Okay, and then we're going to add to that 15 days, and that needs to be in seconds. So 15 days is 15 multiplied by 24 days, 24 hours multiplied by 60 minutes multiplied by 60 seconds. Okay, so this number is going to give us the number of seconds for 15 days. So that's going to be 1296000. Okay. Now let's have a look at the value of our cookie. So this is going to be the output of a function which I'm going to call f1, and this function is going to be of the two variables that we generated earlier. Okay, so I'm going to define this function in a bit. Okay, so let's define this function. Okay, I'm going to take a couple of parameters, a and b. Okay, So this function needs to fulfill a couple of requirements. So the first one, this function shouldn't be very easy to guess, okay? Also, we need this function to be more or less practical in a way that it will allow us to retrieve the variables, okay, from the value of our cookie, okay? So if I go, for example, for a dot b, okay, that means that we're just concatenating the two variables, okay? If we do this, it's going to be very hard to guess what a is and what b is from the value of the cookie, okay? So there is absolutely no way to retrieve a and b from the value of the cookie. But if we concatenate a and b and we place a comma in between, okay, like this, then from the value of the cookie, we can actually write some code that will look for that comma, and then it will tell us that the variable a is whatever is on the left of the comma, and variable b is whatever is on the right of the comma inside the value of the cookie, okay? But to make the function a bit more complicated, I'm going to store the second variable, okay, or generate the second variable in binary. So I'm going to get rid of the function converting to hexadecimal, okay? But when concatenating the two variables inside our function, I'm going to convert variable b to hexadecimal right there, okay, just like this. All right. Now let's store the results of this in a variable c, okay, and then let's return c. Okay, so to summarize, function f1 is going to take a couple of strings and then is going to return c, which is the concatenation of a and the conversion of b to hexadecimal, okay, with a comma in between. All right. And if you want the inverse function, which is supposed to give us a and b, all you do is take the results, look for the comma, and then on the left hand side you find the variable a, and on the right hand side you'll find the variable b in hexadecimal. Okay, so to find b, we just need to go back from hexadecimal to binary, okay, which we're going to do later in the remember me file. Okay, all right, so we've got now our cookie, okay, and we stored the right value inside the cookie. Now the next step is to run a query which is going to store these two variables in the remember me table. Okay, so that's going to be the next step. Now I'm going to store the query inside a variable SQL. Okay, so the query is going to store a record in the remember me table. Okay, so that corresponds to the columns authenticator 1, F2 of authenticator 2, then the user ID, then the expiry date and time. So the syntax is going to be as following. So we're going to insert into the table. So the table's name is remember me. Okay, and then we're going to have the columns where we're inserting our values. Okay, and then values, and then the corresponding values for those columns. Okay, so the columns are going to be as following. So authenticator 1, okay, between single quotes like this. Then F2 of authenticator 2, like that. And then the user ID. Okay. And then expires. Okay, and then the values, we're going to use variables for this, okay, to make our code easy to read. So we're going to have authenticator 1, okay, followed by f2 of authenticator 2. So we're going to create a variable in a bit, okay, that we're going to call f2 of authenticator 2. And then for the user ID, we're going to create a variable as well for that. And then the expiry date and time, we're going to create also a variable for that, and let's call it expiration. Okay. So as we said earlier in the logic section, we're going to keep the first variable as it is, and we're going to store it as it is in the table. While the second variable, we're going to create a function f2, okay, which will be applied to variable 2 before being stored in the table. Okay, so let's create that function. Okay, so function f2 is going to take one parameter, a, okay, a string, and it will give us an output using a hashing algorithm, okay, so that we can't reverse the process and find a if we have the output of the function. So the function we're going to use here is going to be hash, as we did before, okay. Okay, and we're going to store the output inside a variable b, for example. So again, we're going to have a couple of parameters. So the first one is going to be SHA-256, okay, as we did before. And the second parameter is our variable a. Okay, and then we're going to return b. So function f2 is going to return the hash of a using the algorithm SHA-256, okay? So our variable f2 authenticator 2 is just going to be f2 applied to the second variable, okay, which is authenticator 2. All right. Now let's move to the user ID. So very simply, the user ID, okay, can be retrieved from the session variable, okay. And we're looking at the elements corresponding to user ID, okay. And finally, the expiration variable is going to be a date and time value, okay, which is going to be 15 days from now. So we're going to use the date function as we covered in the PHP chapter. So this function again is going to take a couple of parameters. So the first parameter is going to be the format, okay, that we'd like to use for our date or date and time. And the second parameter is going to be the Unix timestamp. So our Unix timestamp is going to be the same as the cookie, okay, which is the current time plus that amount of seconds, which is the equivalent of 15 days. And for the format, okay, to be able to manipulate the date later in the table, okay, or using MySQL, we're going to go for the following format, which is year hyphen month hyphen day, okay, and then space, hour, minute, then seconds. Okay. Now let's run our query. Okay. So to run the query, we're going to create a variable results. Okay, where we're going to store the output of the function MySQLi underscore query. So it's going to take a couple of parameters again, the link variable and our query SQL. Okay, now we're going to check if the query has been run successfully. So we're going to check if opposites of results. Okay, so by the way, if the query is not successful, this is going to return a boolean false, and the opposite of false is going to be true. So if true, then we're going to echo an error message. Okay, otherwise we're just going to echo success. Okay, and the login file is going to return success. Okay, and we're going to manipulate that in the Ajax code. Okay, so the error message can be copied from previous code. So let's get it from there. And let's say something like, there was an error storing data to remember you next time. Okay, there is a dollar missing there. Okay, all right, now let's have a quick look at the structure of the remember me table. Okay, so authenticator 1 is going to store the variable authenticator 1, which we generated using the function OpenSSL random pseudo bytes, and we generated 10 bytes. Okay, so 10 bytes is 10 multiplied by 8 bits. Okay, so that's 80 bits, which is the equivalent of 2 multiplied by 2 80 times. Okay, so if you represent this in hexadecimal, okay, then we need to find how many times we're actually multiplying 16. Okay, so 16 is 2 multiplied 4 times. Okay, so to get that number, we're going to divide 80 times, okay, by 4. So 80 divided by 4 is going to give us 20. So you're going to need to have a char 20 for that column. Okay, so let's update that. Okay, save. All right, now let's look at F2 authenticator 2. So the value of that is the output of the function hash, okay, using the algorithm SHA-256, okay, which gives us 256 bits. Okay, so to find the number of characters we need to divide that 256 bits by 4, okay, which will give us 64, and that's the right number we have at the moment. Okay, before we test our code, let's rectify something in our query. I'm missing the single quotes for the values. Okay, so now we're ready to test our code, which we're going to do in the next video.